everybody. Welcome back to Psychedelics Today. This is another one of our Solidarity Friday episodes with Kyle and Joe. Kyle, how you doing today?
Good, man. How are you doing?
Doing pretty good. Beautiful week. So we're recording this on August 5, a Wednesday, and a lot's happened. But before we get into that, let's have a quick conversation about this class you developed with Johanna Hila, who we've been friends with for a bit over a year now, maybe 2 years since we hung out in California. And what can you tell us about that class?
Yeah, so it's called Imagination as Revelation, and it's a course on Carl Jung and Jungian psychology and the psychedelic experience. Really excited to be putting this out. Johanna and I did a little kind of beta version last summer, went over really well. And now we're re-releasing it. So we're still, if you're listening to this on the beginning of August, when is this released? August 7th is the release date of this. We're still doing some early bird that goes till August 9th. And so this will be a course exploring the history, a brief history of psychedelia, a history of Carl Jung, his theories. We get into synchronicities, the collective unconscious, all of his different theories, and then just understanding how Jungian psychology can be applied to understanding the psychedelic experience, even within like psychedelic integration, and how you could maybe include some of this framework into your own practice if you're a therapist or coach doing any psychedelic integration work. So there's 5 lectures that Johanna delivers, followed by a little short Q&A, usually around 20 minutes to 30 minutes after each lecture. Me and her kind of just digging in and debriefing what she went over. And then the 6th module will also be a Q&A. And I'm excited for it. It's really...
And that'll be a live Q&A that you get to do with people who bought the course essentially ahead of time or early adopters.
Yep. So we don't have a date set as of right now for that, but we're going to do a live webinar. We're going to record it. So it's more of an interactive type of experience. And if you happen to miss it or sign up late, that will be in the course you can check that out at a later date. So everything's self-paced. You can go through it at your own time. If you do buy during our early bird period, the course content is not available still, and it will be available hopefully in the next week or so.
But you'll save a bunch of money if you buy early. And it should be out really soon. I was working through video 2 yesterday, and I was really impressed with not only the quality of like the stuff presented, the material presented about Jung and how that relates to psychedelics, but just the quality was really great. Like the fact that we got a nice camera and a decent microphone over there, like I think really made a big difference. So I'm psyched to finally have a really, really high-end class put out.
Yeah.
So I guess we have to do that with Navigating Psychedelics soon too.
Yeah.
But so that's a good transition. So if you want to learn more about the Jung course, psychedelicEducationCenter.com, you can find it up there. Available for pre-sale. And you can also book consulting calls with Johanna if you want to dig deeper on the history of Carl Jung and how it relates to psychedelics and ask your own questions. Again, check that out. Yeah, now September 17, we kick off 2 more batches of Navigating Psychedelics for clinicians and therapists. And this is going to be a really fun one. Again, we've had a lot of fun teaching this, and I just really enjoy it. What we're seeing out there is that therapists and clinicians are now talking to clients all the time who have to deal with clients who are interested in or have tried psychedelics and perhaps need help integrating, perhaps want help preparing. And there's a lot of legal ways you can do that without necessarily being the facilitator. So, and there's legal ways to facilitate in the US. So that's worth thinking about too. And we kind of get into all that there. Like, what tools do you need to be ready to talk to your clients about this stuff? Do you want to really be blindsided by your clients? I think that's a bad move. Like, let's be ready. Because what was the figure? It was like LSD use is 56% up since COVID started.
I just saw that new report out. Interesting.
Wild. So like, what does that mean? Are people prepared? Are people doing good prep and integration? I would say some are. Like, it's getting better than it used to be, but it's still like a lot of folks are just kind of gobbling this stuff up. And clinicians might have to pick up some pieces or at least assist. Yeah, really, they have to do it themselves, but you can really help. Anything you want to add about the class, Kyle?
Yeah, if you haven't heard us talk about it before, it's a hybrid course. So you'll get lifetime access to all the course material that we have up there, a bunch of different interviews, and then we will meet on Zoom for an hour and a half each Thursday. We have 2 groups. One starts at 2 p.m. Eastern, the other one starts at 7 p.m. Eastern. And we just get to chat about the material during course time. And we can kind of pick into the little nuances here and there. So that's the fun part.
And CE approved. So if you're a nurse, a psychologist, or a therapist, and your state accepts credits from California, which I believe most do, you're in good shape. But you're going to want to check with your license board first. But we've got all that info again at psychedeliceducationcenter.com. And I think that's it for now.
Yep.
So they're selling quickly. If you want to secure your spot, do it soon. Yeah. So excited to learn with y'all. All right, on with the news. Let's start with some good news, Kyle.
All right. I think, just TheraPsil, therapeutic psilocybin. They're a nonprofit based out of Canada. So they just announced some awesome breaking news. On August 4th, 4 palliative Canadians approved for end-of-life psilocybin therapy through Section 56. (1), first legal medical exemption for psilocybin in Canada since the 1970s. So this is really exciting. So I'll read a little bit here. 4 Canadians battling incurable cancer have been approved by the Minister of Health to use psilocybin therapy in treatment of end-of-life distress. These 4 patients mark the first publicly known individuals to receive a legal exemption from the Canadian Drugs and Substances Act to access psychedelic therapy, and the first patients to legally use psilocybin since the compound became illegal in Canada in 1974. The decision comes after 100 days of waiting for a response. And so TheraPsil is a nonprofit coalition that advocates for legal, compassionate access to psilocybin therapy for palliative Canadians, supported patients with their applications to seek approval, and has been advocating for compassionate access since 2019. It's anticipated that there will be many more applicants made through the exemption process provided under the Canadian Drugs and Substance Act. So super exciting to see that push through in Canada. I feel like Canada is definitely sometimes ahead of the US in some drug policy stuff, legalizing cannabis throughout all the provinces and whatnot. So that's exciting, and really exciting to see that people will be able to, even it's just 4 lucky people get to have an experience at their end of life to, maybe confront things, help deal with some of that anxiety. I think that's, I remember when we chatted with Dr. Catherine McLean way back when we first got it rolling, something that she said, it's like, it's almost like a birthright for us to try to prepare for death. And do we have to wait to have some sort of end-of-life illness, or can we start trying to prepare a little bit earlier? So just really awesome to see that these four patients will be able to have an experience and maybe discover things about themselves during their last time here. So congrats, TheraPsil, for making that work for these folks.
And I'm planning to talk to their team, I think, within the next 5 days, and we're going to work on getting them on the show. I'm really excited about what they've done. I was hesitant at first, going, I don't know who you are, so I can't really say if I want to have you on the show or not. But a few emails and back and forth, and we said, okay, yeah, let's chat. And I think this is a really great initiative because people can copy this. Mm-hmm. There's no reason why you can't copy this. You're assuming you don't live in China or North Korea or something, you could probably work stuff through a democratic process to say, hey, these people are dying. The data shows that they can have some really great results if done properly. obviously.
Well, it makes me think, like, I wonder what the potential here in the States is. I remember a few years ago, Trump did do something interesting within this realm, signing the Right to Try Act. And I remember, I think you chatted with somebody, or there was some publicity about somebody in Colorado getting a doctor's approval to use psilocybin for their end-of-life illness and anxiety. So I wonder how easy... Or I wonder, how probable it is here in the States with that act signed. I don't think anybody is really kind of pushing for it. Maybe.
Right. Like, so that guy was related to the Denver decriminalization campaign, and he like kind of testified to the value of this, saying like, I shouldn't have to go to jail for something that's really going to help me a lot. I think it was stage 4 cancer, metastasized like all over the brain, and it was definitely on his way out, but he had the courage to, and the will to get in front of folks and say, yeah, let's talk about this. And I think that was pretty great. So I think that once more and more doctors see that this is possible, more and more doctors might have the guts to do this. The weird thing is, Kyle, is that they can prescribe it, right? But it doesn't necessarily get them access to prescription grade psilocybin or like
true.
Really nice mushrooms, right? They have to procure on their own because it's still a federally scheduled substance, even though it has passed. We're in phase 3 now, right? For FDA trials, phase 3 for psilocybin.
Phase 2. Well, I know Compass was in phase 2B, I believe. So I think they're still going through that.
So they're probably really close. Yeah. I think Federal Right to Try Act allows anything that's passed a phase 1 to be tried for people with, intractable diseases that look like they're going to die. So, yeah. So, food for thought. So I'm really happy that TheraPsil did this. I really hope people, try to get more politically active around this stuff. I know it's, it feels awkward, but, given our current, pandemic and political strife everywhere, and, but we can still get political. And if we do it skillfully, with good intention and good attention to detail, we could do really well. So, I just hope more people kind of work with that and push. We always need more nonprofits doing small local stuff. So even if it's just in your city, like go for it.
Yeah.
Why not? Yeah. Cool. I don't know that we have any other good news. Well, some good non-psychedelic news. British Petroleum just cut they stated they're going to cut their oil production 40% and dump billions into green energy. It's kind of a nice non-psychedelic news topic.
That's sweet.
Like, thank God, like that somebody's doing it. It needed to happen. It's just, nice to get a little bit of like a breath of fresh air in the midst of, the world seeming like it's on fire.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess let's jump into this kind of police and military topic. Start with the Dimitri Mugianis article that he had on Salon.com. He pretty much was trying to show that states and state violence has kind of a long history of psychedelic use. I think he went way back to like the Hashashin, like the assassin group. Kind of like, oh, okay, you can use this hash and whatever else we have in here for bliss purposes. Now go do that. Assassination, you can come back and get more, or all this stuff to manipulate folks. And then there was another one with the Vikings where they used a certain kind of amanita. It was a Amanita pantheria or muscaria, and to act as berserkers. There's this whole like concept of berserkers, and they were raiding folks and killing, and that's what Vikings did. That's what Viking meant. Viking was raids. Like they went Viking. They weren't necessarily Vikings in themselves.
Oh, interesting.
My sister spent a long time studying them, so I learned a bunch. So yeah, going Viking was those raids that you hear about. That's why a number of us folks from like Ireland, England, Scotland have Viking blood because of those raids. So then they go into kind of the, this is interesting. I've been to Dachau. There's a reference to this concentration camp in Germany, Dachau, where they actually used mescaline on prisoners, Jews and Romani, gypsy folks. And this is, I think, where Robert Forte kind of gets that idea where like the psychedelic experiments happening in concentration camps was moved over via Operation Paperclip to the US and MKUltra. Like, I think that's where he gets it. So there is documentation of these drugs being used in Nazi Germany. I don't know to what effect or what kind of success they had, but the idea, I think, was that you could kind of brainwash people,
right,
and use them as kind of willing agents for whatever plan you had. You know, that's what the whole Manchurian Candidate thing was about years later. Yeah, so, you know, we've got that in Germany. I've been to that concentration camp. It was really creepy. And my grandfather was actually part of the liberation squad there in World War II, which is kind of an interesting tie for me. And yeah, then we have it in the US where they're doing tons of psychedelic experiments. And Dimitri points out that, you know, white folks were treated, you know, yes, they were treated badly, they were dosed, but when they were testing on black folks and other minorities, it was really quite barbaric, quite regularly.
Yeah.
And I think he even made reference to Whitey Bulger while imprisoned, being kind of brainwashed and kind of abused with LSD for a long time. And Whitey Bulger was like, yes, I committed a crime, but they committed a crime far worse than I ever committed, which is interesting because he's definitely a murderous person. And another thing worth mentioning is I have family connections to that whole story. I won't really release it on the show, but some family was involved with Bulger way back. So yeah, what do we do with that? I don't know. Like the fact that the government has a long history of using these drugs against people for research purposes, maybe, or for specific weaponization purposes that we don't know about because MKUltra had a lot of documents scrubbed, and it's a really, really, really big program. And even like our last guest on the show, Kyle John Selby, was working at one of these hospitals way back in Jersey, I think, or Connecticut, and didn't even know till years later that it was MKUltra funded. So interesting stuff. And then it goes on to talk about Elijah, the case in Colorado where the cops had the EMTs, I think, inject really extreme doses of ketamine into this poor black guy, really sweet seeming person from everything we've read. And, you know, they're using the drugs to lower their liabilities, right, from tasing people. Because tasing is not necessarily safe and guns aren't necessarily safe either. So, you know, perhaps ketamine is slightly safer, but you know, I understand where ketamine is medically necessary for sedation sometimes, but it should be done like under a doctor's supervision, not under a policeman's supervision. And doses should be sensible, not extreme and not double. Like the guy died from it. So Dimitri kind of called for a number of people like researchers and scientists and doctors to come out against this kind of consistent use to suppress populations. He even criticized MAPS and Rick Doblin for going into the Pentagon and meeting with military officials and like getting kind of approval from the military to go forward. And, you know, the military is now excited again about microdosing. So it's like, what do we do here? I don't know. And what are we really worried about, right? Like, of course, Dimitri is a self-proclaimed anarchist. Like I want to proclaim myself as an anarchist. I just don't trust people enough to want to go there fully. But, you know, he's like, from the anarchist perspective, this just helps governments, which are typically organizations that have monopolies on power, is what anarchists are, you know, against primarily. So any kind of government that's using tools against people is bad. And these are tools that are being used against people. They're also being used for people, right? Like it's this weird dichotomy of these things have such a huge healing benefit for so many different types of people. And they can also be used to support things that are against people. Like
any tool,
you know,
really
any tool, like a knife, you know, or a gun. Like it can be used to save a life or take a life, you know, violently or for good. Or, you know, it's crazy, you know, like how do we negotiate this thing skillfully? Like, I think, yes, like scientists, it's incumbent on you to come out when you see something that's unethical. You should be standing up and using your voice as a scientist. Like if you want to be a scientist that's totally amoral, that's, you know, that's your choice, I guess, but make sure you tell people that you're amoral, I guess. I don't know. Like, do you have any kind of food for like any thoughts on how Dimitri approached that one?
Just interesting to just see his critique of the history of drugs being used in kind of violent ways, and just kind of the history. If people like haven't really known about that, I mean, it's definitely interesting to check out. I'm wondering too, I'm seeing maybe this is more of like a little nuanced thing here. It says between 1935 and 1975, the NIMH Addiction Research Center in Lexington, Kentucky, conducted numerous studies involving very high prolonged doses of LSD, as well as experimentation with ibogaine on formerly opiate addicted Black inmates. My little nuanced thing was, I mean, Hoffman didn't discover LSD until after 35. So I'm wondering if it was ibogaine that they were using back then, or maybe the dates are just a little off there.
Right. And ibogaine was also kind of late to the party too.
Yeah.
So I would guess mescaline, DPT, DMT, like there was some really interesting drugs being used IV back then. And I thought there was a really interesting point in there where I think he mentioned NIDA, National Institute for Drug Abuse in the US, was part of the MKUltra work. And they just kind of transitioned into being NIDA, like, and doing what they do, as opposed to like, you know, coming clean about their kind of dirty history. But this is, you know, this is the job of the victors of history, right? Is to whitewash it so you look like the good guy. I noticed some headlines today saying like, here's the title of the article. Was there slavery in Australia? Yes, it shouldn't even be up for debate. Because the Prime Minister of Australia states that there was no slavery in Australia. So like, this is just kind of how it plays out. And it's ugly at times. It's kind of shitty. But, you know, these organizations say, no, we're an authority. Therefore, we have to be clean, blameless, and have total power, you know, in a lot of ways. So take it for what it's worth. Like, I kind of feel like an asshole saying it like that, but because I want to believe that the FDA is doing the right thing, or the DEA, you know, thinks it's doing the right thing, when I kind of feel like they don't. But you know what I'm saying? Like, it's kind of a weird deal. Like, history is written by the victors.
Yeah.
Have you read The People's History of the United States by Howard Zinn?
No, I think I might have it lined up though in Audible.
Cool. It's like, for people who are starting to doubt what they were taught, I think it's a great starting point. History is super whitewashed, what you're taught in high school, and, you know, not necessarily universities, but at times it depends on the professor. But yeah, what you're taught in middle school and high school is like, you know, not really close to what history looked like.
No,
it's not the story you really want, right? Like, what should you know about the Black Panthers? Like, what do you know about the Black Panthers? They're a really important part of history.
My old landlord used to run with them. She was friends with like Abby Hoffman, Black Panther. She did a lot of activist stuff. She would tell us some cool stories. I remember I was watching this episode called Hippies on Discovery Channel or History Channel. Way back when, before I went to during my undergrad, and this woman comes on. She's like, I remember the first time I took LSD back in like the 60s when it was legal in California. But she went into like all of her activism work, and I think she's made like documentaries and stuff on the Black Panthers and stuff like that. So pretty cool. But I remember seeing the name. It's like, that name looks so familiar. It's like, oh, wait a minute, she's a teacher. I was like, oh, wait a minute, she's my new landlord.
She was a teacher at Burlington College.
She was, yeah. Her name was Roz Payne. Yeah,
that's great. Yeah. That's funny, right? Like, it's surprising because there's so many TV shows, right? They have to like keep finding new people. History Channel is just kind of like extruding TV shows. Like, they've just got raw material and just pumps it out. Yeah, you know, we see that with Ancient Aliens, but you know, there's other stuff they do that's somewhat okay. But yeah. The Yippies are a really interesting piece of history. Robert Forte has some really interesting critiques of Abby Hoffman and that whole thing. But, you know, the Black Panthers are incredibly under-discussed. Like, when you see someone talk about Malcolm X, they're just like, oh, he was violent, therefore not worth talking about. I'm like, well, still a really important figure in history. Yeah. And I think even in Forrest Gump, there were some Black Panther scenes, and they kind of painted them really poorly. Yeah. So, like, there is this kind of thing where big institutions paint these kind of groups that lost, quote unquote lost, in a not great light. Like, I suggest people check out the Black Panther 10-point program, just as relevant today as it was in the 60s. I just found out about it like a couple weeks ago. Just kind of shame on me. But, this is kind of historically inevitable, I guess, that this happens. But it takes people stepping up and like raising history up again to say, hey, no, that happened before. We should not be doing it. So like, please, police, don't think you're the ones that can administer ketamine. Please make sure it's medically necessary. Like maybe it's incumbent on the police to get a doctor on FaceTime first,
Yeah.
Before if you can't get them in a car. But I think it's bullshit. Like you can definitely get somebody under control and in a car, without drugs. You're a police officer with training and you're probably not injured. So you can do this. Please don't be injecting people when it's not necessary.
Yeah, it's kind of sickening. And, I know this is kind of Forte's little shtick too about weaponizing psychedelics. I know I've chatted with him in the past about that as well. And, it's really interesting. I mean, we could even go back even further and just think about what happened during like the Opium Wars to really kind of suppress Chinese culture, just get them super high and then invade, right? And so
super high and addicted, easy to manipulate. Yeah. It's beer. Like the history of beer was used to control people. Like when safe drinking water was scarce and food was scarce, the Egyptians used that quite skillfully. And I think even cultures older than Egypt used it quite a bit too, as a weapon. Or not necessarily a weapon, an instrument of control, because it's a scarce resource. So if you control, it's kind of to like Dune, like he who controls the universe controls, he who controls the spice controls the universe, because spice is like a key to intergalactic travel or space travel. So it's like, what are the things that are key to culture doing what it does? And do you control that enough to have that kind of control that you're going for? Yeah. And that's kind of what I'm a little nervous about with psychedelics. If psychiatry can dominate psychedelics and drugs in general, then, is this what we really wanted? Is this what we want? Like last episode, we talked a lot about decriminalization versus legalization. And we didn't really talk about how that contrasts with medicalization. Like, do we really want these powerful people and groups telling you when you can and cannot take these things? I think the answer is no. Like, we don't want that. We want autonomy. We want cognitive liberty, like you said on Al Jazeera. Like, we want to not go to jail for this stuff. We want safe access, right? Like Switzerland has prescription grade heroin available for free and nobody's ODing anymore. People know their dose. They get supervision if they want it. There's a lot of reasons why that we want certain things and don't want others. So, all right, before we jump from the Dimitri one to the next, do you have anything more on the Dimitri article?
No, I don't think so. Yeah, I think it's just important to know that drugs have been used, as a way of violence, also a way for manipulation and control. And, we just have to kind of go back in history and look at this stuff. And, even if we look at the work of like Huxley, right, and we just think about Soma, like how could this be used to just completely... I think this is, talking to somebody about this, of just like the social engineering that Huxley was like kind of thinking about. And I remember taking this, it's a course on, I don't remember what the course was. It was some sort of social media course in my undergrad. But we were reading 1984 and also kind of comparing Huxley's worldview versus... what's that author's name? 1984. Spacing on it.
Orwell.
Orwell. Why did I forget that? But just thinking about the two different approaches here. And so Huxley's viewpoint was it's what we love that will destroy us and control us. So thinking about just like, oh, I love all this stuff and not really being able to participate in society. So like being addicted to the phone, being like more concerned about drugs, being like just loving what society is throwing at us and realizing, not thinking like what actual implications it has on you, versus the Orwellian perspective is what we fear that is going to control us and destroy us. So fearing Big Brother and having this more paranoid viewpoint of the world. And I sometimes think we're kind of in a Huxley society. Like we're just like, oh yes, this. I mean,
it seems like a hybrid to me too.
Yeah. I guess there is that like, Orwellian paranoia, Big Brother.
Like why should I in Colorado be afraid of the Taliban,
right,
for instance? Like it's silly. But people are freaked the shit out and they're stoked on their, Cheesecake Factory and Big TV, so like if you get in the way of somebody's Cheesecake Factory Friday run, like you might, really see some issues there. Mm-hmm. And they're like, that's all, they're nose to the grindstone at work and whatever pleasure is after,
I think we've seen that
and
disruption.
Pleasure can be imprisoning.
With I think we've been seeing that with COVID and lockdowns and disruption of like the things that we find to numb out and, to seek pleasure in different avenues.
Right. So I've been kind of reading ahead in our study group, and I'm reading that book. Was it Zen and Zen Classics by Blythe?
Yeah.
And there's some relevant stuff in there to these conversations we're having. And Zen is really interesting because Zen isn't necessarily super related. Well, it is kind of a child of Buddhism, but it seems really different from what you might think of as Buddhism. Like, so this leads into the next article, but there's this line he had, like, Christ can't go to heaven until everybody goes to heaven. Like Buddha can't go to nirvana.
Right.
Until everybody goes to nirvana. And we see this kind of rhetoric being brought up in kind of socialist, communist kind of literature. So like, no one is free until everybody is free, which is like, it's a nice thought, right? But we're 2,000 years plus into this kind of post-Christian epoch or this Christian epoch, and we haven't really made much progress there. I don't think. Like, yeah, sure, there's plenty more Christians, and Bill Gates is trying to get people to have like at least $1 a day, if not more, to spend, for health and other things, which lowers human suffering. But what does that have to do with enlightenment or liberation or being able to stand up to these private armies, oppressors and whatnot? Like, this is a long struggle, and this is really Marxist, right? It's got to be like total socialism worldwide. Otherwise, it doesn't count. Like every country has to be socialist. Otherwise, it doesn't count. And that was a big thing in communist Russia for a while. That's why they were so pushy. China doesn't seem to care. China's like took it inward, it seems like. So let's just do China. Be worried about Chinese concerns internationally where they matter, but let's just worry about China. I don't know.
Yeah.
Food for thought.
Yeah. I just thinking about this article by Dimitri and Jonathan Dickens, because there was that focus on Elijah McLain and ketamine. There has been it's not an article, but just something that's been floating around by a lot of ketamine practitioners to sign it about, using ketamine in nonviolent ways and kind of speaking up against it, some sort of resolution about it, which I believe was streamlined by Dr. Belser and a few others that have been, that are using ketamine in therapeutic modalities. So I'm glad that there are clinicians, therapists, and doctors that are stepping up and speaking about this and, joining together to try to voice their opinions about not using these medicines in violent ways.
And Belser being a professor, I think researcher too, at Yale Medical School maybe. And that's pretty amazing that we have Ivy League people coming to the table about these really nuanced topics. And I'm really thankful for it. So, all right. Yeah, I thank Dimitri for writing that. I do think it's worth critiquing organizations at times. I personally don't think MAPS should really change the way they're approaching the research. I just think it needs to get prescribable ASAP. And yeah, that's kind of it on that topic. You know, I get the implications of violence and police and military occupation and violence against other countries. Like, you know, for every American death in the Iraq or Afghani war, like how many Iraqis or Afghanis died? Like, it's really fucked up math to think about. Like, I was very anti-war for a long time, and I still largely am, but I'm becoming sympathetic. I kind of understand it, even though it's horrible. Like I don't really agree with depleted uranium and like the fact that we're shooting uranium all over the place. Like that's kind of fucked up. And still using landmines. Like the fact that Americans were using landmines in the Iraq and Afghani war, even though they were illegal by international treaty, like that's not legit one bit. So, yeah. Anyway, on to this next fun article. So Psymposia put out this post titled, "We need to talk about MAPS supporting the police, the military, and violent white supremacism." So it took me a while to want to read the article. I saw the title and I'm like, all right, not interested. But I read it 3 times today so we could chat about it on the show.
It's been a while since I read it, so I'll try to go back into the memory
I'll
bank.
help you out. So the image is a thin blue line flag with maps up top and 5 blue Punisher ecstasy pills these used to be quite coveted on the black market. So essentially the critique is that MAPS is supporting cops, PTSD, and soldiers, PTSD. And as a result, MAPS is supporting violent organizations that are causing more PTSD and treating the perpetrators versus treating the victims. So I understand why they would write this article, but I think it's not done in good taste. I think it's not necessarily aware of like the broader implications. The article itself isn't seemingly aware of the broader implications of these things coming to market and being prescribable and healing a lot of people. But it is helpful in that it says like, hey, look, cops are doing bad stuff. Hey, look, military has done bad stuff. Like, should we be supporting it? Like, there's violent and racist practices in both organizations. Like, again, international war, Iraq, Afghanistan are great examples of this, Somalia, et cetera. And how do we balance those two things? And how do we balance it well? Like, I think MAPS is almost at the finish line. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to cheerlead for MAPS to cross the line with MDMA, even though they're, kind of pandering to the militarized people who have a monopoly on violence, both inside and outside the country. So like, I don't know, like, did you take anything away of this? Like for me, it's be aware of history, like know your history and, let's try to do our best here. I don't know. Like, what do you think?
Yeah. When I read it, I'm familiar with Dave Nickles' work and kind of his approach, and not Dr. David Nickles, Dave Nickles from the DMT Nexus and Psymposia. When I first read it, I felt like I had to kind of read between the lines here and there to figure out what his approach was. And I was seeing a lot of comments online when this did get posted around on Facebook, and people, I guess, reading it as saying vets and police officers should not get PTSD treatment. And it seemed like when, a lot of people first read this article, Dave was arguing that, this population should not be getting treatment. And I didn't read it that way. I read it that, like, why is an organization targeting this certain population, and it is more of a political agenda. And why is MAPS taking money from like right-winged organizations and families like the Mercer family? What type of money does that, what type of attachments does that money have down the line? Like, it's a donation, but, could there be some sort of implication down the line of them, wanting to have stake in something? I mean, yeah, who knows, So the way that I read it is like, why did they take this approach? Why are they so focused on vets and like kind of like this government type thing, when the government and these institutions and organizations are perpetuating war and violence? Why do we need to try to heal this when they're also the ones that are perpetuating it? So I didn't take it as like we shouldn't treat anybody coming back from war or people that are traumatized from working in the field. Those are individuals, but really kind of critiquing the entity itself, the organizations. Here's an entity, an organization that's perpetuating violence and war. Why should we be working with them to try to heal the people that are coming back when, this might need to be dismantled at times, or, they need to change the way that they approach on how they function. So that's the way I read it. And, I think there's
I think it's because you actually read it, Kyle. Like, I think, my reaction was like, all right, fuck you. Like, I'm out. I'm not going to read it. Right. And I read it and I'm like, okay, like fair. Like, I get it. But I still think it's not necessarily, well, perhaps he's just playing a role as a critic that needs, that opinion needs to be out there somewhere.
Yeah. Yeah, totally.
But it's, it's tough timing. Like, we're all going through such a crisis right now. And MAPS, to me, seems like one of the few hopes. The work MAPS is doing, as a nonprofit.
Yeah.
But like, his point's fair. Like, Infinity War, like Marvel came out with that term, Infinity War. I was calling it Forever Wars. We're in the middle of wars that don't look like they're ever going to end. Like, Trump said he was going to end them, but I don't think he did. And, is this war machine just producing more grist for the mill, more clients for MAP-sponsored sites? And, critiquing Israel, like, I've critiqued Israel a whole bunch. It's not a really PC thing to do, but Israel's hurting a lot of people, Palestinians, civilians, just nonviolent people. It's really a scary scene over there too. So like, MAP's doing work over there. It's like, yes, it's a Western-ish country. It's really scientific and advanced, but, they're doing nasty things. But MDMA could help a lot of people over there.
Yeah. Yeah. And, it's been interesting just like a few weeks ago when this was released and reading a bunch of different comment threads. Like, I know, I think Dave actually reposted something by Manuel from DanceSafe, and just kind of critiquing some of Rick's motives there, and just saying like, I think he has really good intentions, but maybe he doesn't also know what he's getting himself into at times when trying to work with people like this. And I thought that was like interesting, where it's like, what MAPS has been doing for so long, and I could see why they wanted to, maybe switch populations and really kind of focus on, vets and trying to work at that to try to win over the other side, in the sense like, here is a population that say the right really cares about, and hey, we can help treat this. And so from a marketing perspective and also a strategy perspective, like, I could see why that feels like good strategy, because you're trying
right?
Like trying to bridge both worlds. And I think it's to some degree, I know there's a lot of criticism on why Rick did that, but I think there's some good intentions around that. And also thinking about like trying to mainstream it. Like, how do you get this mainstreamed? You got to go through science, and to be able to target some of these people that are high up in these organizations that could potentially help you reschedule this substance. It's good strategy. You might make some headway. And I think about everything that they've done. It's been wonderful. I mean, I don't think if MAPS has been really cranking away at this, like, most people probably wouldn't, be talking about a lot of this stuff right now, right? So I think we also have to give a lot of credit to MAPS and Rick for, sticking through and really kind of working this, even though there are a lot of criticisms on their, the way that they've been proceeding. And,
Mm-hmm.
that one comment where it was like, yeah, maybe when we, us psychedelically, informed people, we're all connected and, everything is bliss and love and I can work with the enemy. And
Right.
do we know, you could find yourself being like taking money from people from that side, and what type of strings are attached to that, right? And you might have the best intentions, but you also have no idea what that outcome is going to be. And so I think that's also what Dave might be hinting at as well here. It's like, we have no idea what the agenda of these other entities are by supporting this. Could they turn MDMA into a weapon, as we're seeing, that article? Like, could, if they start to change their perception around these drugs and see other applications, could we see that mixed up in more violence using psychedelics as a weapon? So, that's how I was reading that article.
Does it make war cheaper?
Yeah.
Does it make war cheaper? That to me, like when we go, okay, what are the Mercers up to? I'm like, well, they're probably hawks, meaning they like making money from war. If it makes war cheaper, perhaps more war will happen to secure, if people aren't familiar with the Project for the New American Century, it's a really interesting Rumsfeld-Cheney document from around 2001, stating that, we're essentially going to be at war for the next 100 years, staking out our territory, doing empire, building empire. And a lot of us don't really like this idea of building empire. We we need oil from overseas, so we're going to support Saudi Arabia with whatever they want, give them all sorts of weapons and provide defense for them almost for free. What? Why? So we have a secure oil reserve overseas. Why else would Israel be strategically important? Because it's close to all these places.
Right.
It's like Saudi Arabia and Israel are our most important allies, and where most of the oil comes from. That's kind of why Venezuela is a really tough scene. Like, largest oil reserves, I think, in the world are in Venezuela.
Really?
Does it make sense that might be untapped reserves? Yeah. But they should be one of the richest countries on earth, but they are not for a number of reasons.
They have an oil crisis.
And I think our country has done a lot to destabilize Venezuela. I think it's kind of in a weird struggle between like China and the United States on account of oil and oil wealth. So yeah, of course, people in power want war to be cheaper. They want to be able to do what they do and have lower liabilities on the back end. Like, PTSD is really expensive for the VA. It's also really expensive when you lose a soldier who's got millions of dollars of training in them. So it's in the Army's best interest, if they want to keep doing war, and Air Force and wherever else. Like, even drone pilots get PTSD and they're in a trailer somewhere. Like, it's in these groups' best interest to have this as an available tool. And, let's keep that in mind. Like, are we just making war cheaper? Like, yes, we are, but we're also helping real people with real lives, with real families who are in this country with us, Well,
I also wonder too, like, there's that critique, and I think I even heard I don't know where it was. Maybe Aubrey Marcus highlighted it or something. But just like, we get MDMA, heal PTSD, and then throw the soldier back on the battlefield. And then right. I don't know.
You don't need to start with a whole new body.
Yeah. But like, when I think about like the human spirit and the human psyche, like, yes, these things can be really powerful in healing, but can you actually wipe away those memories? It might help somebody, to process the memories in a different way. But would that actually make soldiers get back out on the battlefield? Maybe, maybe not. I mean, I don't see it as like this
TBD.
Yeah, this like kind of memory wiper, as like I think some people get that think about. It's like, oh, we have this medicine that cures PTSD or treats PTSD. So if we can like treat the trauma, then they might be more likely to get back out there and help. And it's like, you're dealing with humans, right? And maybe they gain perspective of going, wow, I don't ever want to do that again. So
did you ever see or read Blade Runner?
No, it's been on my list to watch. I know it's very highly recommended.
So Philip K. Dick was talking about drugs and militarization, totalitarianism decades ago. And he had, I don't remember if it was Blade Runner or another one of his books, like do androids dream of electric sheep? But there were these police forces that were highly chemicalized. And, if you needed to feel a certain way, you just pulled this little thing and sniffed it.
Right.
And you had like an adjustable thing. Like, are you tired? Are you too agitated? And it's kind of like the Soma thing, but it's like an adjustable dial. Like, how do I need to feel for the situation? And so you would just do your things. If you needed to forget stuff, you would just sniff the thing and you'd be more focused on this and totally forget about that. So like, there's a lot of pharmacology, like maybe we just go backpedal a little bit. Like, is psychology being used to help in wars? Is it being used as a weapon in certain places? I think yes, like it always has been. So psychology isn't necessarily inherently good, I guess. Like I'm in support of psychology.
Yeah, I mean, even if we think about psychology and whatnot, just in terms of systemic issues, I mean, that's something that comes up a lot in multicultural counseling. It's like, here's a field that was developed by a bunch of white people, white men, and are the theories and frameworks actually useful for people of different cultures? It comes from a very Western individualistic background, and is it actually helpful sometimes for most other people? Seems helpful for people within that context, but doesn't necessarily translate. And could that be perpetuating more like abuse and violence down the line to some extent? Maybe, right? If we're just like not thinking about systems theories and we're just like, yeah.
So it's a really, like, I would love for this to be like a really nice, neat, and clean story, but I think it's a lot messier than we want to think. Like, yes, some cops are doing bad things. Yes, their rates of domestic violence are higher than we would like. The figure Dave used in the article is like lower than I would hope. To like, if I was writing that article, I would want like just shocking figures, and the figures weren't to me that horrible, or like not horrible, but like they didn't really freak me out as much as I was hoping to be freaked out by the article. And that said, police violence being a leading cause of death for black men, young black men, like that figure was used in both, or that statement was used in both Dimitri and Dave's articles. And, it's helpful to keep that in mind. But what does that mean? Like, is it the top 3 most frequent cause of death for young black men? Or is it like top 30? Like getting a little more specific would have been better for me, just so we know, like, okay, is it behind car accidents? Cool. Great. Thank you for that. And now we can go forward, as opposed to like, just kind of alluding at things and going like, am I being manipulated? I don't know. I wanted to read a comment that a friend of the show, Danny McCracken, gave us. He's a Army veteran, and this is in response to Dave's article. So here we go. I think that whoever wrote this has got some serious aggression towards the opposite side. It's common for us to get frustrated when someone else doesn't understand our view and vice versa. But peace is necessary. We are already being driven apart, and this is only fueling that fire. I grew up in a Republican family and in a Republican community. I used to stand on that side of the line as well politically. Now I live in a blue city and have worked in the arts and been a union member for 9 years. I'm an avid supporter of candidates like Bernie Sanders and Andrew Yang. I am by no means a Trump supporter, but either way, I believe the two-party system is broken and we have to find ways to make peace with the other side in order to move forward and evolve. Two opposites work together in stability and synchronicity within patterns and concepts often, such as pulses, waves, or the DNA helix. That's what I need to think, or that's what we need. I think MAPS' approach is important if we are ever going to get people who have traditionally been opposed to allowing anyone access to these substances and medicines for decades, and in some ways hundreds of years, then we're going to need to give them reasons for believing in it and allowing research for it. Veterans and first responders are a strong way of conveying that message. Not only that, but they desperately need access to treatment. 22 suicides a day, a higher death toll than combat deaths, is a matter that needs healing and attention. Yeah, and that figure is probably low because we talked about the non-suicide the
Like
things
car
that are suicide
accidents
but
and
aren't.
stuff that might be
like
intentional.
pulling a gun on a cop just to get shot,
Yeah.
like that kind of stuff. So just because someone doesn't believe in making peace with enemies for progress doesn't mean it's wrong. I agree with the left on many viewpoints, but they can be just as radical. And as the saying goes, only Siths deal in absolutes. Like, this is a really good point. Like, George Lucas had this concept of a Sith, like the bad guys, like the Dark Lords in the background. Like, they dealt in absolutes. Like, the Jedis were a little bit more fluid. They could like play with ideas a little bit more skillfully. And yeah, do we want to be like absolutists when we're talking about things, or do we want to factor in the soft, more complicated things that are more difficult to analyze, understand, communicate, etc.? Like, the country is being torn apart. The country is essentially on fire. And, stuff like this kind of just adds fuel to the fire, it seems like to me. Like, I'm more for peace building. Like, if we can bring people together with messages, that's great. I think it's working against ourselves to make divisions deeper. Like, I have a really hard time with this. Like, if I wanted to talk to a hardcore Trump supporter friend, like, I would have a really hard time. Like, I can't think of any friends right now that are, but I would have a really hard time having a deep conversation with somebody about politics right now. It's hard. It's really hard. But those are the things that can bridge people back together, have connections again, as opposed to alienation. Like, yeah.
I think it's important, and that's why I appreciate Maps' approach to do that, and Rick's work with doing that. And yeah, and I do see some of those points that Dave points out, and it's like, what's really going on here at times? Do we know what we were getting ourselves into? But I think we need to find middle ground, because if we keep just picking sides and just pointing the finger at each other, this is never going to resolve. Like, like my neighbor across the street puts up a Trump flag every day. I live out in kind of like Trump County, and like, it's a really nice guy. Chat with him a bunch. And, if I just said, oh, you're a Trump supporter, I hate you, I'm going to blow you off. We have things in common, and, it's just, I would be very isolated, and since I do live out in a county where there are people that support him and support those beliefs, like, it's just really interesting to chat and hear their sides and hear why they support these different politics and opinions. And I think it's important to, how do we listen to each other? Even though we might disagree, how do we come together and at least try to find some common grounds? And I think this is what's tearing the country apart at times, is this bipartisan system, and we have to pick sides. And instead of just trying to come together to find some commonalities, we're sitting there going like, I'm more woke than you. I don't, I'm going to cancel you out and this and that. And it's like, this is going to continue to happen. And, is that healing? I don't know. Is that a psychedelic vision to just want to, cancel things out and just totally disregard it? Or do we sit with it and try to find some sort of meaning out of it? And how do we heal all these wounds that we keep perpetuating? I think we're perpetuating violence at times by sitting there pointing fingers and getting angry enough. And I get it, like, anger, and it's a valid emotion. We need to get angry. We need to get loud. I'm glad people are out there protesting and making noises. And, it's been so long that people have been oppressed. It's about time people get loud and angry and pissed, rightfully so. But yeah, I think, how do we come together and really try to figure out like what we're all trying to do here? I wrote a post on my Instagram a few days ago. It's just like, to just take yourself away from anything that you're attached to and just look at the earth and be like, most of us don't know what we're doing here. We have a bunch of ideas of what we're doing here, but we're all on spaceship Earth together. And if we can't work together and find some common ground, I mean, we're going to drive this thing into, a black hole, I think.
Mm-hmm.
But it's complex, there's a lot of emotions. There's a lot of like things. Yeah, it's really hard to figure out. I don't know what the right answer is, but I don't know. Psychedelics in the past have taught me to try to be a little bit more open-minded about things I necessarily don't believe in. How do we embody that? How do you got a Trump neighbor? How do you just sit and see what he's up to and see what he's doing? And then, am I, then perpetuating violence then if I talk to him, and that seems like the argument. It's like, oh, if you support them or you're friends with somebody that supports that, then you're continuing to perpetuate this. But it's like, we're all human. And I don't know.
Yeah. Divide and conquer is a strategy as old as time, as old as history, to separate folks and then come in and do your power moves. Like, it's really an unfortunate state, like how divided the country is, the world is. And like, well, how do we really sit down and do that? Like,
I'm sure other countries are loving it because it's easy to then manipulate us at times or come in and impose certain things. And yeah, I mean, it's a great tactic. Really divide people, make them all pissed off and angry, and then utter chaos.
Yeah. So what do we do? Like, I would just say, like, let's start with things that are highly factful, right? Like, psychedelics aren't necessarily an inherent good. Psychedelics can be used for both healing and for nefarious purposes.
Black magic's
in
real,
general can
right?
also be.
Look at shamanism.
Yeah.
A lot of witchcraft.
Sure, you want me to do a curse on that person for 3 chickens? Absolutely. Yeah. Of course I'll do that. And this is not just primeval, like, shamanism too. This is like part of the Western magical tradition that circulated around Christianity. This is some stuff that people in Rome were doing. I wouldn't be surprised if big organizations are still doing this stuff subtly. So yeah, I don't know. Just let's try to figure out how to have common ground, how not to make more enemies. Like, are you doing this just for clickbait? Are you doing this to, like, progress the narrative? Is this the best way to serve your goal? Like, think really carefully about that. Perhaps it makes more sense to write a 200-page essay on the topic than a 5-page deal that perhaps is inflammatory and divisive. We don't need things to be more divisive, I think. Yeah. More new conflict is not going to be helpful for us. And yeah, we need bipartisan support. We need diplomacy. Diplomacy might seem roundabout, but it is important. Yeah. So I think that's it on that one. Unless you've got anything else you want to throw out.
No, I think that's about it. But yeah, glad we discussed that article. I know it's been brewing for a while.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I was like, oh, I'm never going to read it. And then I read it and I was like, oh, okay, let's talk about it on the show. So I'm glad we did. Yeah. So thank you, Danny McCracken, for letting us kind of use your quote there. I kind of wanted to talk to a few more veterans. I'm friends with a number of veterans and sympathetic to their plight, and wish I got more feedback. But Danny, thank you for being the only one. Yeah. So I guess that's it for now. Again, pre-sale is on for the Jung course. You can find it at psychedelicEducationCenter.com. Really amazing stuff in there. You'll learn a lot about Carl Jung, the unconscious, and psychedelics, and it's going to be worth your time. And if you want a private coaching session with Johanna, you can get that on there as well. Pretty cheap price for that too, by the way. So check that out, psychedelicEducationCenter.com. And on September 17th, we kick off the next couple batches of Navigating Psychedelics for Clinicians and Therapists. And if you want to get ready for the coming wave of psychedelic use, both out in the wild and in clinical type settings or retreat settings, come take the course. Like, we will help you prepare for how to talk to clients and how to stay safe legally and all that kind of fun stuff. So learn more there at psychedelicEducationCenter.com. Hope to see you there. Again, stuff's selling out quickly, so sign up soon if you want it. Otherwise, you can catch another edition. All right. Cool, Kyle. Thanks again, and we'll do it again soon.
Thank you, everybody. Take care.